We're going to be reading out of Matthew chapter 1 today. I know the Christmas story is usually this Luke chapter 2. My daughter asked me a minute ago, are you going to read the Bible out of Luke 2? And I said, no, Matthew 1. And Emma, you were right. It does start in verse 18. The first 17 verses of Matthew, usually people just kind of choose to ignore. That's just where it tells you about somebody that had a kid, and then another one had a kid, and another one had a kid, and eventually we get down to the birth of Jesus Christ, and that's where this story starts. So I want to read that to you here tonight. You can follow along with me if you want, but it's a little darker out there than it is here perhaps. Now in Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 through the end of the chapter, it says this. The birth of Jesus Christ happened this way. While his mother Mary was engaged to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband-to-be, was a righteous man, and because he did not want to subject her to public disgrace, he intended to divorce her privately. When he had contemplated this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. This all happened so that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophets would be fulfilled. Look, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did what the angel of the Lord had told him. He took Mary as his wife, but he did not have marital relations with her until she gave birth to a son, whom he named Jesus. As we saw in the video earlier, there was an added comedic value to it, but it drove an interesting point home when Joseph said, how many songs are going to contain things about me? And he just kind of ignored that. Of course, we had at least one song tonight that was about Joseph, and we've had those at other times. There are some people that have written songs from the viewpoint of Joseph. But so many times he's kind of like ignored in our Christmas story. He's there because somebody had to help Mary know when to turn left and when to turn right on the donkey to get, I don't know. Anyway, I just came up with that on the fly. I probably shouldn't go there. But like they didn't have GPSs, so somebody had to tell her how to get there. Except she had already navigated her way all the way down to see her cousin Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, a few months before that. So she was pretty good on her own, I think. So we kind of are stuck wondering, what was Joseph doing? You know, like what is his place in this story? And there's several things, if you're paying attention to this, that are going on here. First of all, I think that every guy and gal that gets engaged has a lot of plans for what that's going to look like. You don't just jump into that with no expectations for what your relationship is going to bring. You probably are thinking things like, where are we going to live? When are we going to start having children? How many are we going to have? Where are we going to raise our family? What am I going to do for a living? Although for people like Joseph living in that time period, things were a little bit different. It would have already been decided on some of those things as far as where they live. They usually would live the same place they grew up. Wherever the man was, they would build on to the home where his father and his family was, and they would build their own home there and on the same property, and then he would raise his family there. He would probably do the same work that his father had done. Whatever type of business or work his father was employed in would be what the son would learn to do, and then his sons after him. And so what Joseph would have been planning as he's engaged to Mary, or betrothed to her, as the word is used sometimes in our scriptures, as he's engaged to her, he would have been expecting a few things that would continue always like they had always been. That he would have some sons, they would learn to do what he had learned to do from his father and so on before that, and that they would carry about that work in the same town that he grew up in the same town they were raised in. And they didn't have to have any dreams beyond that. That was the good life. That was the kind of life that it wasn't just like somebody growing up in a small town saying, as soon as I graduate high school, I'm getting out of here. I don't care if it's to college or the military or what it is, I'm going to get out of this town. That wouldn't have been their mentality most of the time. They would have been extremely happy to continue that family lineage with their own new family. In fact, when somebody got engaged, it was usually kind of a somewhat prearranged or somewhat arranged by the family members, the fathers of the families of the bride and the groom. They would have had a way that they would have worked this out. It would have probably been a couple that had known each other for a long time, and they would have arranged this and said, these will be a good match because our families are a good match. I tell you, my daughter's 8 years old, but I've already started telling my wife about certain people like at her school and stuff like that. I'm like, not that one. I see the way they pull up into car line, like I don't like the way their parents are like a little pushy and stuff, when the cars have to merge together in the two lanes. At school, we're not doing that. Like she's not going to spend time with that boy when she's older, like I'm already picking it out, not based on the son, but based on the parents. But you see, that's really how it had worked in those days. If the families of the parents were compatible and got along well, that means that the way they have raised their children up to be, their children are going to be compatible and raised well. So by the time they were actually engaged or betrothed, they would enter into an agreement that they were going to be married. And to break that off wasn't just simply a woman getting mad and tossing a ring back, or a guy saying, you know what, I can't deal with you, I'm done. They would actually have to have a legal divorce proceeding to end the betrothal or the engagement. It wasn't something that was just entered into lightly and quickly and then gotten out of just as easily. It was something that was a long time in the making and wasn't easily broken. Also, along those lines, if a woman, and I know there's children in the room, so you're going to have to read between some lines here, but if the woman got around a little bit, then that was grounds for this divorce to happen very easily, and it would put her to public shame. But as it turns out, Joseph was an honorable man, our scripture says. Joseph was honorable, and he wanted to, when he found out that Mary was pregnant and he knew it wasn't his, he decided that he wasn't going to put this out to the whole community for her name to be trashed, but he was going to say, I'm not moving forward with this. Now, there's plenty of men who have stepped up when, for instance, they meet a girl who's got a couple kids and they're like, well, I'll go ahead and I'll marry her and I'll raise those kids. But Joseph's in a different situation. That wasn't what he bargained for. What he was expecting was his young fiancée would be his wife, they would be together, and that would be that. But when he finds out she's pregnant, his hopes and dreams are all shattered at that moment. Joseph, we're told not a lot of details about his life. I mean, we can infer a few things. We're not given a character sketch of him. But if you think about it, Joseph, it says that we know him as a carpenter. And there's really two places in the Bible where it mentions Jesus is the carpenter's son. That doesn't tell us much. I'm not going to nerd out on you here because I don't know the Greek language well, but our New Testament was written in Greek. And the word for this what we translate as carpenter was a tekton. And I can remember that because there's a really great brand of like wrenches and tools that's called that. So I figured like workmen, craftsmen, guys that work with tools. And that's exactly what Joseph was. He was a tekton. He was somebody that worked with tools. And it doesn't mean he constructed houses. It doesn't mean he built furniture, although he might have done those things. But it really shows an image of somebody who was a craftsman who worked with materials and turned them into something. I think about Jesus. He was supposed to grow up. Any of Joseph's kids were supposed to grow up and learn the trade of their father and do what their father did. So Jesus is known literally as the son of the tekton, the son of this tradesman, this craftsman. And they're thinking that Jesus knows some of this stuff. And to be sure, I think he did. I think Jesus had a lot of years crafting things and turning things out of raw materials and turning them into something useful and good. I think there's something beautiful about that. Because you see, he learned that while he could have been studying religion and studying with a rabbi, but instead what he ends up doing is he stays home with his father, Joseph, and he begins learning these things and putting them into practice. As he does that, it teaches me something about what Jesus had in mind for you and me. You see, Jesus is taking us, how we are, raw as we are, uncut, unperfected, just sometimes just kind of a seemingly insignificant thing, but he sees the beauty in what could be. like a craftsman would. When a craftsman sees a certain wood grain in a lumber yard, or he sees a stone of a certain type, and he knows what he can put tools to that and turn it into something. Well, a craftsman looks at these raw materials and says, I can do something with that. You see, Jesus looks at us the same way. He loves what he sees. Even though he knows he can make something more beautiful out of it, he says, I love what I'm seeing in front of me. I can take you and I can make something great out of you. You see, what we're talking about and what we've been talking about here in our church on Sunday mornings is this idea that the coming of Christ brings more than we could have ever imagined to our lives. He brings more than we could ever dream or imagine to this world. And when Jesus looks at us, he sees something that he has intentions for you. You're not just taking up space. You're not just existing. Jesus has an idea for you, and he wants to do more in you than you ever dreamed possible. Well, here's Joseph. Joseph gets his whole world turned upside down when he finds out not only that his fiancée is pregnant, but also when an angel comes and speaks to him, which I think every time you hear of an angel coming to somebody, so many times they say in the Bible, it says, fear not. Angels don't look actually as nice and pretty as we think of them with all the nice ruffly white wings and all this. They're a scary looking creature if you read a few actual descriptions of them. And so their first thing they always say is, don't be afraid. Like, I'm one of the good guys. I've come here to speak for God. And now you're thinking that's not making me feel any better. Like, God's got a message for me? Why did I get singled out? What did I do wrong? And he says, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You see, God has chosen you for something special, Joseph. He's chosen Mary for something special. And what God has put inside of her body through his miraculous power, and by the way, I heard recently that that's apparently a big sticking point for some people. They think there's ridiculous that a virgin could conceive and bear a child. And yet those are usually the same people that believe that we all sprung up from some nothing that was a result of a big explosion trillions or billions or however many years ago. They keep changing it. And that somehow out of this primordial soup or slime that somehow existed and maybe some lightning hit it or something and all of a sudden life appeared. That's like a virgin birth on a lot bigger scale. It's easier for me to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus through his mother Mary than it is to believe that we sprung out of nothing by some random chance. But Joseph, what he's told here is that this child that his wife is going to bear and that he's going to get to raise as his father. Remember, Jesus was known as the son of Joseph. He gets to raise him, and he gets to not only instill in him the values that the people of Israel held as they worshiped their God, but he also gets to teach him how to be a man of integrity. You see, Jesus didn't already automatically grow up just because he's the Son of God. He didn't just automatically have all these things within him. It took good parents raising him in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. It gives me a lot of trepidation as I'm a parent and I look at what I have to do with my child and I look at what they did with Jesus and I think, man, I probably am not near the parent that Joseph was or that Mary was. And so when Joseph and Mary are going to be raising this child, when the angel speaks this thing to Joseph, all of a sudden Joseph's entire worldview gets flipped upside down. You see, what ends up happening is everything that he knew and believed in was changed in that moment. Sure, Joseph had the hope the Israelites had, the hope that God was sending his Messiah one day, but he had no idea what that would look like, and he certainly didn't think that it would be through any work on his own part. And so Joseph, this child that'll be born to them, every dream that Joseph had for his life and for his family with Mary, all of that got twisted and turned upside down immediately in that one moment. Think of another guy whose life got turned upside down by Jesus. There's this guy later that comes after Jesus has lived, died, rose again, and ascended into heaven. There's this guy named Saul who hears about Jesus, and he sees all these followers of Jesus, and he hates them. Because Joseph was schooled just like, Saul was schooled just like Joseph had been. Saul was schooled in all of the Jewish teachings, the hope of Israel, and he had the scriptures and the law of Moses, what we call our Old Testament. He had all that, and he lived his entire life by these things. And so then he goes off when people are beginning to follow Jesus as the Messiah. This guy named Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the guy we know of as the Apostle Paul, he goes off and he begins to fight against this Christian movement, locking Christians up in jail, dragging them off so that they would be punished or killed. And he believes that he's doing the right thing according to his religion until all of a sudden he meets Jesus. Jesus, of course, is in heaven, but he shows up on earth in a blinding light, blinds this guy named Saul, and Saul can't see for 3 days. So he begins fasting and praying and asking God to show him the truth, to show him what's up and what's down. His entire worldview got switched upside down, but when he came face to face with Christ, it all started to click and make sense. I think it took that full 3 days for him to get it, but all of a sudden, once it all came together, he realized that this guy he'd been fighting against truly was the Messiah. You see, when we meet Jesus, when we come face to face with him, we get our entire world, everything that we thought we could build our lives on, if it's built on anything other than Christ, we get our entire world flipped upside down. And it takes us honestly looking at it and saying, okay, God, what is it that you want me to do? Jesus changes everything for us. The other interesting thing is I look at Joseph's life. I mean, right away, like I said, we don't get much of a character snapshot of him, but we can infer a lot of things about who he was. There's this verse in here that as a man, it really trips me up that it's included and they really mean it. It says that Joseph waited until after the baby was born for him to consummate their marriage. You guys should be like, wow, that seriously, we always skip right over that because we're like, oh, this is the story, it's about Jesus, it's about the baby. Yeah, but Joseph, seriously, that's a huge sacrifice. He did that because he honored what God was doing, and he says, I don't want to get in the way of anything that God's doing. I can put off what I want. I can put off not only that need and desire I have, but I can put everything that I had hoped to build my life on, I can wait on that. If my entire job is to raise this baby up as the Son of God that he is, I will do whatever it takes to do that. Joseph was a true and faithful Israelite. He followed the laws of Moses, and he was willing to follow God's plan no matter what it was and no matter what God told him to do. This would be quite the journey for them. If you don't know the story in a nutshell, if you read in the Gospel of Matthew just for the next chapter or two in there, you'll see things like they're not only is Jesus born in not where they lived in Nazareth. They had to travel down to Bethlehem. They got to sleep in a cave where she delivered birth. He wasn't in just some wooden stable like we depict so many times. This would have been in a shepherd's cave, and they still exist outside of Bethlehem. There wouldn't have been any hay. Sorry for that. They brought the animals to the hay. They didn't bring the hay to the animals like we do in modern farming. And as much as this is a beautiful little thing, it would have been a stone trough for water, not for feed, that they would have laid Jesus in. But those are a lot heavier to carry around, so we opted for the what we might call the modern traditional, not the actual tradition of what it would have been. But none of that really matters. They're symbols, they're remembrances. But Joseph and Mary, their life wouldn't have been anything what they planned. They immediately have to go on this journey. They immediately don't have room to stay because their town is flooded with travelers. And then, while they are there, there's angels, there's shepherds, everybody's showing up. Can you talk about an invasion of space? We need some boundaries here, people. This woman just gave birth, and now all of a sudden shepherds are showing up. Of course, shepherds are used to helping their animals give birth and all that, so it shouldn't be a big deal. They're used to this kind of thing, but Mary surely wasn't. I'm sure she didn't like that too much. So here they are. Maybe within a couple years, we're not sure when the wise men show up, but they show up. And now there's these guys that are travelers from a faraway land in what we would call the Middle East today, or Persia perhaps. And they travel in and they bring these gifts that are totally inappropriate for a baby or a toddler. And they're probably thinking, what's going on with this? And then all this stuff happens. Then right after they leave, there's another angel. There's a lot of angels in the life of Joseph and Mary. There's another angel that shows up and he says, hey, by the way, those guys, they didn't mean to, but they kind of told Herod about Jesus and he's really jealous of him right now. And he wants to kill him. So you need to get out of here right now. They get up in the middle of the night and they head for Egypt, which was not a close close place to go to. Like they had to travel a long way. I'm sure they were tired. They might have had to sell off the gifts that the wise men gave them, like that re-gifting thing, like, when you take something back to the store because it's still got the tag on it. I joked with my family the other day. They wanted me to wear these like pajamas that were supposed to be really warm so we could all have matching Christmas pajamas. And I said, I'm glad you left the tag on so I can just go ahead and return them. And I was just kind of joking, and I didn't. I wore them anyway. But I'm thinking, how many gifts actually just say, I don't want this, I'll take it straight back. We've got an uncle in our family that did that every year. Whatever you gave him, he just took it straight back to the store, pocketed the money, I don't know. Joseph and Mary probably had to sell off some of the gifts that the wise men brought them that were, there was gold, frankincense, and myrrh, because they had to take this trip out of the country immediately with no plans, no money, no luggage, nowhere to go. Can you imagine this life that they had? Now they're immigrants in a foreign land where they don't even speak the language, and they're staying there for who knows how long, until the ruler that was seeking the life of Jesus had died, and then they were able to move back, finally settling in the family's homeland of Nazareth. So it's quite a journey that Joseph had. He had to be so flexible, so amenable to anything that was happening, and listening to the will of God. I wonder sometimes if I even listen to just a fraction of what Joseph was listening to. Like is God telling me things and I ignore them in my life? I think we all do that from time to time. All these things that Joseph went through, and as fascinating as it is, I think about how much his life was upset by Christ. And yet he was okay with that. Has your life been upset by Jesus? I don't mean in a bad way, but I mean we all have our plans in life. We all have dreams, hopes, ideas. We have all these things that we want to do. And then we come face to face with Jesus. See, Christmas, so many times it's about the shopping, the snow, the songs, the Santa Claus, all these things that was in that skit, that play we watched earlier on the video. But we really need to come face to face with Jesus for who He is and let Him really mess our lives up. Because you see, He has so much more planned for you than you could ever imagine. Can you imagine the adventure that your life would be if you just said yes to Christ every single time He had something for you to do? I'm not going to get into all of it. My day yesterday started out with breakfast, and I just planned on going to breakfast with someone. I had an appointment for that. And then it was about 6:45, I think, when I got home. I'd been back and forth running this whole crazy thing that was going on that I can only say was the hand of God saying, do this. You're in the right spot. Here's somebody I need you to talk to, and go wherever that leads. And the rest of that took me the rest of the day. And it was a great day, and I'm looking forward to the outcome of what that situation was, helping somebody out that was in a bad place in life. You see, when we just say, God, wherever I'm at and whatever I'm doing, whatever plans I have, I don't care if they get done or not. I only want to do what you have in store for me. When we do that, when we get to live that way, our lives are in the hands of the one true craftsman, the tekton that Jesus learned from his father Joseph. He is crafting a life for you that you could never have planned, that you couldn't have ever imagined. He has a gift for you. It's not wrapped up. It's not anything maybe tangible. It probably won't include riches or wealth or fame or any of that. Might include some infamy, who knows, There's a lot of guys that followed Jesus that weren't well liked, but they heard from their Savior when they entered into heaven, well done, my good and faithful servant. The present that Jesus has for you is more than you can imagine.